Hey y'all, hey, welcome back to Truth, Trust, and Trajectory with your girl Shakim B. Today I have another interview. I'm going to bring her on up and let her introduce herself to the audience.
Hello. Can you hear me
Hey, Beth,
okay?
how are you? So, do you want to just introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Beth Nyguard. I am from Iowa. That's where I'm at right now. Small town girl moved to the big city of Des Moines through this whole process. So I love the title that you have, just growing from grieving and trying to find purpose again has been huge. And I'm excited to talk about that, but more importantly, also tying why my grief was so severe and talk about mental illness because my husband died of suicide, which brought me a couple extra layers of the grief onion, if you will. So,
Well, I'm sorry for your loss.
thank
And
you.
I'm very happy to have met you and have the opportunity to share your story. I feel like it'll definitely add some value to many people.
I hope
Um,
so. I hope
yeah,
so.
it definitely will.
Yeah.
I always say if it can at least just help one person, then
Exactly.
job well done.
Exactly.
You know.
Absolutely. Pat on the
um,
back.
can you share the moment you realized you needed to rebuild your life after experiencing profound loss? And then before you answer that, can you just kind of like go into exactly what happened and kind of your process?
So the backstory is my husband and I were married for. I'm getting all fogged up for some reason. I'm also
Yeah, I'm like
sorry.
looking at mine too. I'm
There
like,
we
what's
go. Um, the backstory is my husband and I were married for 20 years. We were together for 23, so we knew each other better than we knew ourselves in some ways. Um, we had two beautiful children, and we lived in a small community and had a wonderful, wonderful life. Um, uh, and then that all kind of came crashing to a halt. In retrospect, I can see a lot of changes in the last year and a half of his life, especially in the last year of his life. And I had no idea what he was going through. I went through, I was going through, sorry, I'm trying to organize what I want to say here. I previously had a breakdown, a mental breakdown, if you will, from a work experience I had in our small community. And I remember just sitting and rocking myself on our bedroom floor. And he looked over at me and said, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, I can't even, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like I don't have any control over what I'm thinking. I need help. And his answer to me was, "Suck it up and go back to work." And at the time, I was like, "Oh, what a wonderful husband." But now, in retrospect, I realized that's apparently was his answer.
Mhm.
So when he, years later, when he passed away, I had no idea. My kids had no idea. He wasn't really himself that much the last few years, and he started, or in the last year, and he started pushing people away. Now that I see as a pattern, but I didn't realize it at the time because he was also a grumpy old man, and he loved being a grumpy old man. So I didn't think too much of it. Um, and so one day I couldn't find him. And I finally went and kind of located him and found him. And he had died by killing himself with a shotgun in the backseat of his truck in a church parking lot in a country. And so I was in complete shock. His family was in complete shock. That we all were, we all were. So, um, just going through that by itself, and then the grieving process, and then there's so many layers. Being a young widow, our kids were 10 and 15 at the time, and which are big years
Yeah.
to lose your dad for one reason, but for this it was even more difficult. And so I've got to be honest, I probably was in shock for about 18 months, for about a year and a half, and I kind of woke up one day and realized I've got to get out. I've got to move on. Not necessarily move on, but I realized in that moment that if we didn't change something, we might be able to survive this, but we will never be able to thrive again. So the kids and I moved up to the big city, and moved and tried to change our belongings. It was hard being in a small town because you just, everywhere you went, you had glances of, which I know they were caring, but it just felt like pity and, and nobody wanted to talk to you. There was people that didn't want to even look at you because we reminded them of Chris, who's my husband. And so it was a difficult process, but I think that was the first point where I was like, we need to do something different, or if we don't change our environment, we're never going to be able to thrive, is really what it came down to. And then you move on to the next stage of just being able to relax and be in your grief. And that was hard because I still had 2 kids running around trying to figure things out and trying to deal with their emotions through this whole piece too. And so it continues to go forward. And then you, as much as you feel like it's going good, you slide back, and you continue to want to be yourself again. And the secret is you're never going to be yourself again. I will never be myself again. And in fact, I'm stronger than I've ever been because of everything I've lived through and gone through to try to move forward.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So the other backstory of this, part of my purpose was to set the stage. I was the breadwinner in the family. I brought home the bacon. I was I was in a large role within the community, and then I started my own financial planning practice. I had a community building I had just bought 30 days before he died, to try to help within the community. And so he literally was a stay-at-home dad the last year of his life. So twofold, that's hard because my kids, that was their on-site parent, is my husband. So that was hard. And then through that process, it was really hard because I felt like I needed to go back to work. And I couldn't because I'm a big picture executive type person. Yeah. If I could do something small to keep my mind busy, that would have been helpful, but that's not really what I did in the world. And so it was very difficult until it took me a long time to realize my purpose is not what it always had been. It was always trying to be successful, trying to, make sure that my family had everything they need, supported the 4 of us together. It was a long time before I realized that's not my purpose right now. My purpose is making sure the kids and I are okay. And on some days, that's just being alive. That didn't mean showering every day. That didn't mean 4 square meals a day. That just meant everybody was alive.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that was everybody was alive and everybody was honest. And the one thing that I can take away as a silver lining, the one thing I'm thankful for is my kids and I are so honest with each other, because we know the backlash of hiding your feelings and not talking about things that you really need to talk about and get out. And so we learned that, as difficult as losing my husband was, he took a temporary problem of being depressed for a period of time. And instead of getting help, he ended his life, which just transferred that onto us in a different way. And so we've always been very open and honest. And that's a relationship I probably would have never had with my kids,
Yeah.
as much as I'd like to think so. But it's difficult. Yeah.
I would definitely imagine so. I mean, that's a tremendous loss in like two different ways.
Yeah.
I would just imagine just from, having your life partner, make such a huge decision without you and,
Mm-hmm.
have that conversation. And then also like your entire way of life seemed like it
Mm-hmm.
was just shifted. So you went from like one role to like now you're playing all of the roles.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so how do you manage, or what was the process of you getting to this point, and like just how did you manage to like pull it together and then devise a plan?
Um, I think the first piece is I realize I'll never have it pulled together because I'm human.
Yeah.
I think we don't give each other enough grace. I have 3 tattoos on my side because I was like, I'm good. I'm over this. And I'd get a tattoo to commemorate it. And then a year later, I'm like, I wasn't even close. I've got so uh, uh, and I still feel that way. But on the other hand, I'm also at the time I've wanted to do something important regarding this.
Yeah.
Since the beginning, and foolishly I thought I could. It's now been, in a couple of weeks now, it will be 8 years since I lost him, and I think it's just been the last year where I'm finally strong enough to understand and be able to process everything. Processing is key, huge, because without that, you can't really move forward. And even if you try to move forward, you can pretend. I'm from, a, an area of thought that you just pretend it didn't happen and you move on. That's been how I was raised, and not even, it's just more of even a generational thing. I think back at when I was a kid and how, we didn't talk about anything, we just moved on.
Yeah.
And I learned that was not going to work. Um, and I'm going to sidetrack here for a second. So this is the second suicide in my life that's been extremely traumatic to me. In 1988, when I'm giving out my age now, in 1988, when I
Kind of
was
same
in,
here.
yeah, in 1988, when I was in 8th grade, one of my classmates, who was a close friend of mine, also died of suicide. And so I learned a lot from that. I learned, because in that day and age and in that environment, I was lucky that I had all my classmates, and I'm from a small town, so I had 37 classmates. We all took care of each other, and we were all going through the same thing. But at the other hand, like, we went to the funeral, and then we were not allowed to talk about it ever again. You just didn't talk about it. It was a bad thing. And you didn't want to talk about it because it was bad on that person, because suicide was so bad. It was such a bad topic in 1988. You felt bad bringing it up for them, or you felt like that was disrespectful to them almost. Where now I'm like, this might have been the last few minutes of my husband's life. His life was so much more than that. But if people can learn a lesson from this, I'll keep talking. I'll keep
Yeah.
talking. The sad thing is, it was uncomfortable then to talk about suicide, and it's just as uncomfortable now to talk about suicide, but with a little bit of understanding. There's still such stigma, and there's still about suicide, but more importantly about mental health.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't have the stigma of mental health, we might be able to help some people so they don't reach that spot. And but I did learn a lot from my friend, that it took me over 20 years to just get to come at terms with that, because I didn't do anything and I didn't process. And then when, you know, you continue to have these life events happen in your world and you kind of do the same thing, you're like, oh, that was a horrible thing, but I got to move on because I've got to keep doing this. Right.
Yeah.
When you have this big piece that no one thinks that you're bad going to therapy when your husband kills himself.
Mm.
Before that, everyone was like, why are you going to therapy? What would you do that? And I tried to do it once, and it was regarding a work situation. I was told to go back to work. So it's amazing that how, when you feel uncomfortable in being in that environment, to actually speak and process and do all of that, you continue to look at everything that happened. So you take the death of Chris was hard, but that wasn't even the hardest part of the process. The hardest part was how everyone reacted around you. The hardest part was realizing there was a lot of trauma that I needed to deal with that I never did. And so being able to continue to go in the world with those eyes open and understanding that it's okay to take time and it's okay to understand. There's a lot of things that happen in your life that you wish hadn't happened, but even all of everything that's happened to me, I have no regrets. I've learned something from everything that's happened to me, and you continue to go forward and move on. So it was a large, it's just kind of like peeling an onion continuously and seeing, until you get to that core. Can you tell me what the question was? Because I totally got sidetracked when I was talking about my friend. Because I'm.
So the biggest challenge you faced as a single parent navigating grief?
That wasn't even close to what I was trying to answer, was it? Sorry
That was
about
the
that.
next question. No, I don't want you to have to go through anything.
Okay. Is this the next question?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
You're doing great, Beth.
I'm doing great. Yeah. I am very human.
Yes.
I am very human, which is, I think, the biggest keys. That's one of the bigger keys that I learned. I'm human, but also all the people around me are human. So I can't get too upset at everybody.
Yeah.
The biggest piece of single. Okay. So there's a couple of things. Did you say single parenting?
Yeah. The biggest challenge you face as a single parent navigating grief.
So my biggest challenge is I was never a single parent, and people feel like I was. I was a solo parent, which is completely different than being a single parent. A solo parent doesn't get to converse and talk, even if we weren't together, and he would still be the parent, right? He would still be the I could still have a sounding board. I have no sounding board. And so you take all of that on yourself. The other piece is the biggest piece that was hard, because 15 and 10. So I went through the teenage years with my daughter, which is, anyone that's had a teenage daughter, that's by itself fun, regardless if you have a village. But the biggest part that I really struggled with is I didn't have a good cop, bad cop. It was so hard. And one time I actually called a friend over. I'm like, I just need a bad cop to come in, because I want to give this advice, but she needs someone here. And I think overall, that was the hardest piece. I mean, at first it was hard sitting at the concerts by myself. And at first it was just hard being not having him there and things like that. And I felt so bad for my daughter right away because she was 10 and my son had turned 15 the day before he died, which is hard by itself. But I felt at the time when I was in it, I was like, oh, at least he got 15 years with his dad and he got all this time. And I felt so, I felt so bad for my daughter. And now in retrospect, I feel worse for him because my daughter, well, she missed out with her dad. My son, literally the last 3 years of his, stay at home life with his parents, he didn't have anybody because his dad was gone and I was in complete shock. I was there. I physically took him to school the first few years and stuff, but we were just trying to live. And that was hard enough by itself. So my daughter at least has gotten me, now she's a senior in high school, and she's gotten me back to the fantastic person I am to be able to guide her and mold her into this world. But it's interesting how the things you feel bad about while you're in it are completely different than when you look back.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that was the hardest part.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Just in having, those ages, like you said, those are really pivotal, huge ages, right? So having to kind of like alley you and finish the rest of, with the developing and, them taking everything in and then getting used to having you like in a different, essentially like you're playing a whole different role than what they were used to. So
yeah,
that's a lot.
not only that is I wasn't even the on-site parent. So I remember like I had no idea when soccer practice, he took care of all that for us. He was, he was the person that coordinated the kids and took care of them every morning. And I remember, right away after he died, my daughter she would not leave my side. And we'd have to get up and take my son to band practice early in the morning, and she'd ride, whereas we lived in a small town. So she always just stayed home and slept through that whole process, and she would not be alone in the house. She also made sure that she also was obsessed with John Stamos because she wanted her own uncle from Full House, Uncle Jesse, to come move with us and help, which at the time I just thought she was kind of obsessed with John Stamos. But now I realize she literally wanted Uncle Jesse to come in and move with us because, he helped Danny out when his wife died. Why can't Uncle Jesse come and help us?
Yeah.
We literally had a cardboard cutout in our house. And she put it in the window and people would drive by and they're like, what is that about? And I'm like, it was like our security system. Like, and you just have to let them go through. And all these things that people thought were interesting my kids were doing, I just saw it as just part of their grief like that. Or another example is my son has a beard, which is super cool. He's almost 23 now, right? Thank goodness it's super cool to have that. But when I look at him with his beard, he likes to give people a hard time because he does grow a good beard. I'll give him that. But when I see him with his beard, all I can think of is that he got a razor on his 15th birthday and his dad died the next day and never showed him how to use it.
Oh, wow.
And so it's in, their life continues, but I have all that pain of everything that's moved them through that. Yeah.
Wow. Do you think that he's like aware of that's why he keeps it? Or do you think like it's kind of just
no? I think he's lazy.
Kids.
I think he's a boy. No, it's probably not. But in my world, that's what I think of. Yeah.
Yeah,
no.
yeah, definitely. Oh,
I'm so grateful for my son because my daughter and I are we're very similar,
mm,
emotionally deep people, and my
mm,
son is very black and white. And as much as he's just kind of I'm so grateful for him because he'd be like, "Yep, we all miss him."
yeah,
Okay, yeah, and so he's huge. I'm just so proud of him. Yeah.
yeah. How has your definition of resilience evolved through your journey?
That's a good question. My definition of resilience has more of a smaller time frame to it. Um, After being through, a number of different things, you're always trying to get to that end game, right? You always want to try to like, I moved on and I tried to just conquer everything I wanted to and move on. And what comes to mind to me is one of my favorite movies is from the 80s. And it's about an executive who gets fired for having a baby, and then she comes back. It's called Baby Boom. It's really
Oh,
old.
I love that movie. Yeah, I've seen it. I was
Yeah.
like, "Wait, that sounds
So,
familiar."
so, so this was my definition of resilience before I went through this. How about that? So if
Yeah,
you know Baby Boom, it's a great movie from the 80s, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
I used to actually even gave my my managers at work applesauce once as a joke because I would say this all the time. So for those that don't know, it she was an executive. She gets fired mostly because she has a baby she's taking care of and blah blah blah. And she goes to Vermont or wherever and starts making applesauce because she's bored. Then she ends up selling the applesauce at the local food store. Then she starts making this baby chain conglomerate wants her, and she walks back into her boardroom, right? And they're trying to give her the best deal ever for a business deal. And she's like, no, no. But I'm like, I always wanted to find my applesauce. Like, what is she made applesauce out of this whole horrible, I'm sure, that character was just like me. Like, my purpose is gone. I don't know what my purpose is anymore.
Yeah.
Like my purpose is being the successful executive. And then she finds her applesauce. She finds a way to kind of move forward and at the same time say, ha ha ha, I'm good on my own. And, I didn't need you in the first place. So that was always my definition of resilience,
Mhm.
going through grief and going through all these pieces, because I actually tried to go to back to work like 3 times unsuccessfully. And every time I got a job, I would be like, okay, I'm back. And then it didn't work out. It didn't work out because the kids still needed me. It didn't work out because I wasn't ready or whatever reason it was. So my definition of resilience is still moving forward and being okay with going back and knowing that my resilience at the beginning was just taking a shower at least 3 times a week. I'm making it
Mm.
sound like I didn't bathe at all, but it's true. you know,
I mean,
my,
okay,
my
so
resilience was getting out of bed,
yeah.
and I need to celebrate that just as much as going to a boardroom selling applesauce.
Mhm.
So that was a huge aha moment for me as well. Being on this podcast is a huge part of my resilience because I get to talk about what's
Yeah.
important, and I get to talk about as much as I can talk about um, this and maybe inspire, like you said, one person. That's all I ask to do. That's all I want to do.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And, as far as the showering and getting out of bed, like anybody that's ever, experienced like some sort of loss,
Mhm.
or, deep emotional despair,
Mhm.
that is a win.
Yeah, it
I
is a
would
win. It is a win.
time where I didn't experience that type of loss, but I did experience a loss that kind of it almost put me on my ASS,
Yep.
all the way. And it was
Mhm.
just like, I had to write notes to myself on my whiteboard every day as I walk into the kitchen, like, hey, Kim, don't forget to feed yourself today.
Mhm.
Don't forget to take care of you. Because
Yes.
you're so focused on that loss and that emotion and just
Mhm.
it can keep you stagnant if you allow it. So
Mhm.
like big ups to you for
Yeah.
acknowledging that and that is resilience.
And it goes back to, like I said before, I wanted to go back to where I was. I just wanted to get back to normal. Like all I wanted was get back to normal.
Yeah,
They're and then they're like, "Oh, you'll find a new normal," which ugh,
I
ugh.
hate that thing.
I hate that term.
You're like, shut
I hate that term. Um, Normal, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a big loss or if it's a small. We all continue to grow and live and learn. A conversation with someone can change your alter and your perception of everything.
yeah,
So we continue to grow and learn, regardless of what it is. As much as difficult as this whole process was, um, it's rewarding to have the gift of all of this unfortunate wisdom that I have, because
exactly.
it's made me um, look at things different, and I appreciate things more,
Yeah,
and I don't have fear of things anymore because of it as well. Um, the worst has already happened, so let's try and do something new.
I love that.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone who feels paralyzed by the weight of their own grief?
You're not alone. You're not alone. And I think the hardest part of grief is you feel alone.
Yeah.
Um, the hardest part of losing Chris was it took me a while to realize everybody else lost him too.
Mm,
They lost who Chris was to them. And the other piece is I looked back at my friend from with my other suicide loss in junior high and realized I had this whole connection of people that were going through the same thing as me. It took me a while to realize I was the only person that lost their partner. I was the only person that lost their co-parent, which was huge. And everybody else is going through their own grief. And then with suicide and the way, and they're going through grief, and everyone's going through guilt because everyone feels bad for one reason or another. They should have done something or did something, which is part of the problem with just the words we use today. I find it difficult that we have this whole suicide prevention campaign. We don't have cancer prevention campaigns. I mean, we know what that is, but suicide happens for different reasons. I'm not going to pretend that they're all the same because they're not. They're very different. Chris's suicide was from depression and something he didn't talk about. There's, people die of suicide for other reasons too, and it's hard to lump all that together. And when I say that, I've people are terminally ill and want to leave on their own accord, or maybe that's their end game because of something else they're not doing in their life that's okay, and that's their exit plan. But I think that was the hardest piece, is just everybody is grieving. And it wasn't until about a year late, actually it was a year later, um, one of our good friends is like, I walk by your house every day and I want to come in and see you, but I can't walk. I just can't even pull myself to be in his environment because it's too hard. And they're grieving just as much, just in a different way. The difficult piece is when you're grieving a loss that is someone that you depended on every single day, is just like my kids and I were really the only ones that depended on him every day. And so that's a different level as well. Yeah.
What sparked your passion for advocating for mental health?
So
Obviously, played a huge role in that. But if you could go like a little deeper.
yeah, absolutely. So ironically, I remember specifically sitting in my living room about a year before he died, and my son was in 8th grade. And that was the same grade I was in when my friend died in junior high. And I remember thinking, I should start talking about that. Like, I'm finally at the point where I can do that. And I was very grateful at the time because my son was going through communion and they were talking about commandments, and they were talking about suicide and do not, thou shalt not kill and all that. And we talked about that for a long time because I said, I don't agree with that because I had a friend that did that, and there's nothing, they're not they weren't a bad person. They didn't commit a sin. They didn't commit a crime. Their mind was sick, and their mind tricked them into thinking this was okay. It's just as if another part of their body was sick. And my son and I had lots of conversations about that. And I remember thinking at the time, I should really start talking. And it didn't really come up until he was in 8th grade. And then, however, I should have, because maybe something would have changed. I didn't, because I was too busy trying to be successful. And my husband died when he was in 9th grade. And I'm grateful because we had all those conversations before. And I remember the night he died, I went to my son and said, do you remember talking about all that? And he's like, I do. And so, I just wanted to make sure my kids never didn't love their dad for who he was. And that they knew that it had nothing to do with them. It had nothing to do with anybody other than the fact that he needed to get some help.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most difficult parts, right? And I think that's not discussed enough, because I do see, like, what you're talking about as far as like people's perception, right? And we kind of like sum up the entirety of someone's life just based on the way that they exited, not
Yeah.
realizing that, the war against the body and the mind is a very real thing. And, I think that it's right for people to slap labels on it and, assume judgments, because at the end of the day, you don't know the strength and severity that someone is
Yeah.
going through. But that battle against the mind and the body is like very real.
Right. Right. And we're not able to be vulnerable with each other, and we just try to hide so much. And so I'm completely honest, through this process in this last year, I reached rock bottom. And I went to a hospital for 4 days and got help. And I'm so grateful for that, because, and I felt bad about it at the time, right? Because you're supposed to. Looking back, I'm like, how did it take that long to reach rock bottom? How did it take that long? But it was just so many things happening and so many things ending at the same time, and just being exhausted from it all. But the sad thing I learned through that process is when I told people what happened, it was just like telling someone that my husband died of suicide. It was like, like, it's such a bad thing. And it was one of the best things I ever did, right? Is just to learn to take care of myself and, get off your stinking phone for a minute and a half and put it away. Just breathe. And think without being told what to think. We don't do that as much. And so I that's my passion, is like, it's okay to talk, and it's okay to be able to be vulnerable, and it's okay that we fail, and it's okay that we're going down a bad path, and it's okay. And we just need to understand that it's okay to get help. We're all human. We're all human. We're all
Yeah.
human. So
So, how can we as a society better support individuals dealing with mental health struggles?
I think as society, just talking more. Ask your kids every day what their feelings are. What was their worst feeling of the day and the best feeling of the day? And let them know it's okay. Let everybody know it's okay to have bad days. I don't know why we've come to a society that we're supposed to take a pill and be happy every day, because that's not how the world works. And but that's how it's being perceived. Like, you get sad, go get on some medication and be okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to dig deep in the dark parts, because that's where all the messy stuff is. That's where all of your clarity will come from. Once you get through that. And it's my best friend and I we'll call in the middle of the night, and I'm like, we got to feel to heal. That's our favorite phrase. We've got to feel to heal. And so it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be good. But once you get to a point where your sad feelings are saying, this world would be better off without me. That's when you go get super good help, because that's not true. It's just tricking you. But don't pretend everything is fine all the time. That is our F word in my house. Fine. That's the 4-letter F word. I let my kids say they had a fucking bad day before I have them tell me they're fine. Because to me, it's just, we don't even acknowledge anyone. Think of how many times in a day you cross paths with someone and say, how are you doing? And they just say fine. And you're like, good.
Fine, and you? Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's.
Are you though? Are you?
No. Yeah. Nobody's fine.
Yeah. No, not today's economy.
No. Exactly. I struggle every day. So I don't know why. We just need to be more honest and be able to talk about that. And it's okay. And I think the other piece of that is the campaigns and all the, go talk to someone. That's hard too. Because I have to admit that my husband had 2 examples where people were having very difficult times, and they reached out to him, and that made him even more uncomfortable that he would shut down and not do that to someone else. So not everyone is able to take that in, and you get older and you realize, this friend I need for this and this friend I need for that. That's the other piece about him, is it was really hard on him to see other people struggle. And when they would talk to him about it, it was really hard on him. So it didn't surprise me that he really didn't come out and say anything, because he was so uncomfortable with it himself. And so know that if you're not good at doing that, I appreciate that. Let's get you some help, call 988 together if it's like a severe situation. We all, everyone's trying to say, I'm okay to talk to and stuff like that. But talking is one thing, but when I just want to make sure there is a line, right? There's a line that gets crossed of, this is not the same as being sad.
Oh, yeah.
Help them get help, and don't shut down.
Exactly.
Yeah. And let them know you're human too. I can't deal with this, but I know someone that can help you, and I can, let's find help together.
I like that. That's a good boundary too. Especially if you know that you can't, you don't have the capacity to handle maybe what they're bringing forth.
Yeah. Because not everyone is good at that, right? Yeah. When I was having my hard time, I called the one person that I knew would take care of me. I didn't call other people that were also on my favorites on my phone.
Yeah. So
So,
everyone,
right. Not
delegate.
everyone's able to do that.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing is if we can continue to talk and
definitely.
talk and not be ashamed of our feelings and not be ashamed of how things happen. I think the joy of that is we can actually really celebrate the really good times because we pretend it's good all the time and
Mhm.
it's not. I think that kind of gets, on the other hand, we don't get to do that as much. Um,
Exactly.
so that's another reason too, right? Like let's really celebrate the successes. Um, yeah, buy a new loofah when you finally shower, things like that.
Yeah. Um, how did you rediscover your sense of purpose after experiencing such a profound loss?
I think again that I knew my purpose after all this happened was I'm like I need to speak and do that, and I really wanted to, but I needed time to completely heal and process everything. I was trying to hurry up and
Get better?
hurry up. Yep, hurry up. Because quite frankly, I was just exhausted. I was just sick and tired of being sad. I was just like, I was sad for so many reasons. I was just exhausted. I had so many times I would just leave my house and go cry because I didn't want to cry in front of my kids. And it was just exhausting trying to pretend you're okay
Mhm.
all the time and trying to pretend like you want to go back. Everyone needs a little bit more grace of being able to take the time they need to do whatever they need. And there's no time frame for that.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, I think the hardest thing about grief is people have a lot of strong opinions about how your grief timeline should be. So people feel very strongly, and I find it so funny. So, uh, 2 weeks ago was my husband's birthday, and every year for his birthday, I put out a Facebook page, like, if you were lucky enough to know this man, smile, think of, a joke he told you, think of, celebrate him today
Mhm.
because he's more than his last few moments. Um, and it's funny, like now, 8 years later, people are like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine now. I'm like celebrating him because I don't want him to be forgotten, right? I
Exactly.
don't I don't want him to be forgotten. Um, the funny thing is when I did that like 2 years after he died, everyone was too uncomfortable to say anything. It's just very interesting. Like it's on their timeline. And then you get a note of you really need to get over this. You really need to, yeah, it's amazing how, and the thing about grief is it's very clear. There's a population that understands grief and there's a population that doesn't. And
Like
I'm,
in
yeah, like
yeah.
any type of empathy, right? And I'm great. When you find those people, you can tell they
Yeah.
know, they know.
Mhm.
The people that don't know, I'm so jealous of them because they've clearly never gone through anything to be able to even closely understand it. And so I'm jealous. But it is hard because it seems like everyone wants to have a timeline and then you kind of try to feel like you need to have a timeline yourself. And
Yeah,
yeah, uh, grace is huge.
it really is.
Yeah.
And I think more people need to practice.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you share a specific moment where you felt joy return into your life unexpectedly?
Um, Again, it's the little victories. It still goes back to the little victories, just like resilience. Joy comes at, the first time I went home, because so home is where we were living. And it took probably 5 years,
Mm.
maybe not that long, 4 or 5 years before I was able to go home without having a panic attack. That gave me joy
Yeah.
because it's an important place. It's my history. My parents live, my family's from there. I grew up there. All of that. But it took me a long time to be able just to, those were the little victories of being able to just do things that I normally could have done that don't impact me. And that took a lot of work. I mentioned that I had found him. So for the first probably 2 years, if I saw a vehicle like his, I would have a huge panic attack and would literally throw up in my car sometimes. They were so bad just because of that. Where now I see a vehicle like his and it's kind of like a red cardinal to me. It just reminds me of him instead.
Yeah.
That takes time.
Yeah.
And time does not heal wounds by any means. That's a bunch of bullshit.
I agree.
Time does not heal any wounds. What time does, though, is gives you perspective and it gives you peace from it because all the wounds are still there.
Oh, yeah.
And they can be opened up with a dagger at any minute because I was having such a hard time finding him that day. If I'm supposed to be with someone and I can't, and they're 30 minutes late, I assume they're dead. Like, that's just what I do.
Yeah,
Like, it
it's like a
just
trauma response.
continues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that you learn to deal with those things because you had time to understand how you need to react and what situations you should and should not be in. And as time goes on, you're better off. But it's not because of the time, it's because of the perspective you have within the situation itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I probably love Chris more today than I ever have. And losing him is just as hard today as it was the day he died. So, and as long as I look at my children's faces, that will always be true. So, and grateful.
So I wanted to talk about your book.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write your book, and what is the message that you hope readers are able to take away from it?
So my book is regarding just trying to find, like, I love your TTT here, and mine's kind of PPP. So I learned quickly that, if you don't have passion in what you're doing, and if you don't understand what your true purpose is, you can't find peace. And the other extra P's in there is to process. You need to process because if you don't, it's just going to blow up and continue to blow up later on when you least expect it. So I'm very proud of us for being able to do that and not shove it under the door and just pretend like nothing happened. And quite frankly, he was too important to do that too. So it kind of upset me when people would say that to me. He was too important to us. My book is really about understanding. It's continued to work. I've drafted one, and now I looked at it with all the perspective that I have and and the piece that I have from it, and I'm kind of looking at it from a new angle because there's so much to be talked about. Just moving on from what I've shared today, moving on from this bad situation and trying to continue to move forward and just succeed again, if you will, completely thrive again.
Yeah.
The thing about it is it's I call it unfortunate wisdom. But now I realized it's the gift of unfortunate wisdom. Like, it's a gift. that I got to have. And it's about that, and just the nature of, we need to talk. We need to talk, because even all of those little pieces that I struggled with are the same things that my husband struggled with, and he's not here.
Yeah.
You know, he was struggling with so many different things and he didn't talk. And so let's talk. You know, the more we can talk, as I shared with you before, I think the biggest piece regarding this, and the biggest point of what I want to make sure I share and bring out to the world, is that we need to make this uncomfortable topic much more comfortable. It needs to be a comfortable, we need to be more comfortable. There's nothing wrong with talking about our feelings and how we feel. And then on the other hand, I also just want to uplift the men in our world, because they're the worst. They're the worst. They won't talk if they have they won't talk if there's a physical issue. You know, it's the same thing as you go somewhere and, you know, something feels wrong for a long time, and then you finally go to the doctor and you have 3 weeks left to live, right? It's the same. We need to talk and be able and know that there's help regardless of what it is. So that's the purpose of my book. I just want to be able to have a catalyst to be able to talk more and be able to share our story more and be able to make this uncomfortable conversation much more comfortable in the world today. So whatever I can do in my corner of the world to do that, that is what my purpose and that is what my passion is going forward.
I love that.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone supporting a loved one through grief or mental health struggles?
So there are two different things. The mental health struggles are hard from the standpoint of there's not, well, both are hard actually. It's their timeline, right? So take mental health first. It's hard to watch someone go through, and I didn't know I was watching someone go through something, but since then I've seen so many other people that have reached out to me. It's hard to walk through, and you can try to save them as much as you can, but until they realize they need to save themselves, there's nothing you can do, which is really, really difficult, which is why it's even more important to have these conversations, that it's okay. People feel that way. But let you tell them my story. Like, if Chris had any idea that our lives would be turned upside down and that we would have had to live through what we've had to in the last 8 years, I know for a fact he would be here. He would have no idea, because he was just in the mindset that, you know, he was just in the mindset that if he was gone, then everything was going to be okay. And while he never talked to me about that, he left 20 pages of letters. So he had thought about this for a long time, and reading that, I'm just like, I just wish I could like hug him and smack him and do like, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? So that's the hardest thing about mental illness. That's why we need to, like, the only preventative piece is that people need to understand they're responsible for their own mental illness, right? People need to understand there's help out there. And as much as we want to help each other, we need to get them to a place where they understand that no one's going to be able to help you unless you help yourself. And so having these conversations, just talking about them and knowing, you know what, it's okay to be this, but once you get to this, you need to get some help. Grief is hard from a standpoint of just understanding it takes time and not making it be on anyone's timetable. And I think the biggest key of that is what I said before is your role in that life made a difference. There's a reason, right? And no one has the ability to tell you you should be done grieving, because I'm gonna grieve for the rest of my life. I'm just better at it now than I was before. I've had practice. I know myself. I understand. But don't let anyone tell you what you should or should not be doing. As long as you're moving forward in any little way, it's okay. It's okay. So yeah, I would, that would be my thing. And the other pieces, don't get so distracted by everyone around you, because they're all horrible to you. Everyone is horrible, and they mean well, and they love you. And it took a long time for me to realize how human everyone else is too, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot to deal with. And so it's a lot to deal with people. Just even recently I was somewhere and they're like, oh, way to bring that up for her. And I'm like, I'm super comfortable talking about my life. And I don't know why it's making you so uncomfortable that my husband died of suicide, because I would love to talk about it. I want to know, because I want you to know, why is it so uncomfortable for you? It's just, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, and that's with, I think, a lot of grief, right? Yeah.
I think it's going to take, like, hopefully it doesn't take too long, but I think like within this century in itself, this is really becoming, like, more openly discussed.
Mm-hmm.
It's just unfortunate, the ones that we lose in the process, and the hope is that eventually, collectively the world gets to a point where they're more accepting of, mental health and more supportive. And like you said, more people do need to have the ability to give grace. And
Yes.
at the same token, people have to be able to feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And the world is just so judgmental,
Yes.
and
Yes.
like, why are you so uncomfortable? It was, I took the L,
Mm-hmm.
you
The
just got no,
biggest,
just the,
right. The biggest quote I kept saying in my head through grief, once I found it, was, those that understand don't judge, and those that judge do not understand.
I love that.
And that quote, I probably say to myself 2 or 3 times a day, because and that's okay. And now I'm getting to the point where I'm grateful you are judging me, because you have no idea what this is like, right? But I think that's, and to your point, we need to do something. I'm hopeful that, a lot of where this started from is generational gaps too, right? So my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, they're the ones that just shove it under the rug. You find out the family secrets 50 years from now, 50 years after, and all that stuff, right? So this generation is obviously another extreme. The younger generation. Yeah. So now we got to learn this and boundaries, and however that's going to work. But yeah, I think that, again, the more you talk, the more you hear, the better off we're all going to be.
If you could go back and speak to yourself at the beginning of your journey, what would you say?
You will be okay. Because I didn't know if I would be many times. Yeah, I think that's all I would say. You will be okay. And it's okay you're not okay today. But in the long run, we'll be okay. We'll be okay.
Well, you are very courageous
That's beautiful.
and
Thanks.
strong and beautiful. amazing life, and I love the fact that you were able to make it here today. And I love
Yes.
you for that. Like I really do. My last question for you is, what gives you the most hope and joy as you look towards the future?
My children give
Mhm.
me all the hope and joy. Yeah. Uh, and I think I'm starting to fall. I'm kind of at this point where I'm starting a new chapter in
Mm.
life, right? And people say new chapter. I'm almost starting a new volume, right? So I lived this childhood, then I lived through uh, ugh, marriage and family and career and all of that. And now I'm on my own for the first time in my life. So
Mm.
my husband, I got married when I was 21. He like got me as a child bride.
Yeah.
So I next year will be for the first time living by myself for the first time ever in my life. So that is huge just for me, which is something most people have already discovered in their world, right? So everyone's kind of climbing a different mountain. Um, and it's amazing they don't always come in the same pattern as yours do, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So i'm but I'm instead of being scared of what's going to happen, I am just excited. I'm excited to go out and meet people and talk to people and get and be able to connect and get a perspective I didn't even know I needed to have from meeting other people. The world is so big and there's so much to look at and just embrace and love.
For sure.
So I'm so excited for that. And I'm excited to continue to watch my kids move through their worlds and, uh, and I'm just excited things have gotten, I feel back to where I can be. I'm back to the point where I'm not back to where I was because I'm better. I'm
Yeah.
much better. But I'm to the point where I can take on what things that were important that I just couldn't even take on before because my heart was too full of just going through what was in front of me. So it's nice to be able to care for people again because I haven't been able to do that. And it's nice to be able to just continue to live life with, better, better glasses on, right? Yeah. The thing about this unfortunate wisdom is, like I said before, I don't fear a lot of things. I'm not worried about things because I've lived through the worst that I can. And even if it wasn't the worst, I know I can get back. I know going forward I will be okay because I can tell that to myself now. If I made it through this, I can continue. So I kind of said that once. I'm like, God didn't put me through all of this for me to shut up. So I'm just gonna keep talking.
It's
There
definitely
has to be a reason for this.
there always is, and I think one of the biggest things
Mhm.
is that us not knowing, what it
Mhm.
is what causes like that anxiety and kind of like the uncertainty, right? But then there's also
Yeah.
another element to that. It's like an excitement, right? Once you come to terms with the fact that yes, there is a grand scheme and a plan for things, right?
Mhm.
You might not necessarily know what it is, but when you actually get to that destination, or at least halfway there, you can look back and say, "Oh, this is why this happened," you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that's a beautiful thing. And
Yes.
Beth, I just
Absolutely.
want to thank you so much for
Yes.
being here today and sharing your story and all of your wonderful words of wisdom. And I wish you the most success. I feel like you're gonna do something more. I do. I
Yeah. I
really
got something. I don't know what it is yet, but it's
I
gonna be
feel it.
good.
I feel it for
Thank
you. I
you.
really oh.
It's good. It's always the strangers that get behind you.
You know
Isn't
what?
that
It's
funny?
when you start aligning with your tribe, that's what it
Yep.
is.
Yep.
God puts the right
Absolutely.
people in your, they're like messengers, like they whisper something and then,
Yeah.
show up
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
And
I
I'm
call
just
them
super
God
grateful.
winks.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
little God winks, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I was supposed to just randomly connect with you. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's awesome.
And I
It's
do
awesome.
appreciate it. And for all the audience watching at home, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Please make sure you leave a message and the comment box. Let me know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was. Please also leave some encouraging words of wisdom for Beth. Make sure you guys subscribe, like, and until next time, bye bye.